Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Lecturio webinar titled Empowering Capacity Building in Disaster Medicine Training in Crisis and Conflict Zones. My name is Goran Stevanovsky. I am a senior health professions education consultant here at Lecturio, and I will be your host for today. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present our wonderful speakers. Then I will give the floor to them for the conversations that I too am looking forward to hearing as much as you all do in the audience. And then in the end, we will showcase some of our products, especially the ones that are related to disaster medicine and AidUP. And I will have our wonderful colleague, Jaime, joining us to do that. Okay, so these are the speakers for the day. We have Professor Dr. Martin Bricknell and we have Dr. Sohrab Dalal, who is going to be our moderator. Now, these wonderful individuals that I am very excited and happy to hear today are first, Professor Dr. Bricknell is a globally recognized authority in military and disaster medicine. As a professor of conflict, health, and military medicine and the former Surgeon General of the UK Armed Forces, he brings unparalleled insights into health systems operating in the most austere and volatile environments. While our Dr. Sohrab Dalal is an exceptional military medical practitioner with nearly 30 years of clinical, operational, and warfighting experience. Dr. Halal brings vital strategic expertise from his specialist roles at NATO, so his former role at NATO HQ and the UNDH MOSH, I'm not sure if that's pronounced right, where he drives critical innovation, medical support, software development, and international healthcare solutions. They can obviously introduce themselves more and tell us more about their work.
It's a great pleasure to be here today and moderate this fantastic webinar to discuss the recently produced course on hospital disaster medicine by Professor Bricknell and his wider team. But I just wanted to talk a little bit, first of all, while we still have some participants joining us, on AidUP and where it comes from. So many of you will know that AidUP is a European health security aspiration as a joint aspiration between NATO and the European Union. And it's an initiative to strengthen Europe's resilience in disaster health and conflict medicine. And the way it does that is through a unified digital learning capacity building platform. And that's what AidUP essentially is aiming to do. And it addresses some of the continuing growing vulnerabilities across the continent, from hybrid warfare, drone threats, and strained healthcare systems, of course. And the key intervention is by training and improving resilience through training. So as you may know, Lecturio is active in a number of countries. We have participants from all over the world today in today's webinar, from the Middle East, Far East, Africa, and so on. And it's a global innovation and education company. And there are many academic partners, of course, not least of which King's College today with Professor Bricknell. And there are a number of videos that you can access across the site as well. So the challenge in disaster health are these four critical points. Today's healthcare providers, learners, have no time to learn. There's no unified curriculum for disasters, and the educators and the regulators really lack the actionable data of how to teach and how to tailor learning. And so traditional tools are a little bit outdated and unscaled. I used to spend lots of time teaching one-to-one, but also group, but through webinars and IT platforms. The reach is much further. So the solution is essentially a precision medical educational platform, which is AidUP, very much scenario-based and AI supported with some real-time data. And of course, because we are speaking to an international audience, it's available anytime and accessible anywhere. So this gives you an idea of the constellation of activity within AidUP. And there are a number of training courses around the constellation, which you can see. And they are easily accessible through this site here. AidUP, here is the AidUP website. For those of you that haven't seen it, talk to our team, link in, and you can find a number of links to those courses. And as we said earlier, there are thousands of courses which are available for you. And they're also developed at every stage of your learning as well. So I encourage you, if you haven't, please do take a look at the AidUP website. And of course, the core objective, the aim, is to train 10 million people across the European Union, professionals, responders, volunteers across the EU and wider member states by 2030 in disaster and disaster response. So that's the aim, and where we are with AidUP and Lecturio. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Martin Bricknell, who is the King's College London Professor of Conflict Health and Military Medicine, and again a hugely illustrious career over 30 years. I won't begin to enumerate the number of academic qualifications, publications, and so on, and clearly a leading light for the Defence Medical Services for many years, and now holds the chair, a professorial chair at King's College. So, Professor, over to you. But first of all, a couple of questions for you to hone your thoughts and minds. First is, what's this course about, and how was it born? Where did it come from, and why have you created it?
So very much picking up on your point about this constellation of courses in the slide that you showed earlier, Saurabh. As we start to think about how health systems respond to disasters and mass casualty events, of course, the hospital is the central focal point for the care of patients. And there are a wide range of courses that teach the function of the emergency medicine department. But the perspective for the hospital disaster management course is the hospital as a system within the system of healthcare response. And in a few moments, I will go to some slides just to provide some further detail of the content of the module, but very much just picking back on your point. So why? Well, the constellation of courses up until this point was primarily around out of hospital, pre-hospital care, and we recognized that it was vital to have a course that looked at hospitals within that framework.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great introduction as to where that course actually came from. And I think from my observation, I spent most of my military time in the pre-hospital front space, and we always rely on the hospital just to carry on and do what we do when we bring patients to them, and really examining in a systematic way how hospitals ought to and should provide that disaster care is a vital link and a vital component in the systems-based approach to delivering healthcare to combat and non-combatants equally. So really excited to see what the course involves and what the components are, and really moving through in terms of who is it for and how you access it. But yes, if you have some slides, if you could introduce your course, that would be great.
Yeah, so let's go to the slide pack and just wait for it to come up on your screen, which should be present now. Essentially the course is quite long. It lasts for about 15 hours in total. But what I'm going to do with this slide pack is show you the key concepts within it. And then I'm going to close by putting the course into the full picture. So I'm going to talk about lessons learned from mass casualty events, then an emergency care system framework, thinking about the phases of a mass casualty incident, and then placing the hospital in this network. And through that, I'm going to illustrate with a graphic that's part of the module, both how hospitals sit within systems and then how hospitals adapt as a system to a mass casualty or disaster incident. And then finally, I'm going to also talk about phases, because not only do we need to think about single events causing a mass casualty incident, such as a transport accident, we also need to think about events that may last over days or weeks. And of course, we've all experienced the COVID crisis, which was an event that lasted many months. And sadly, a significant number of countries around the world are experiencing conflict, which also has a tendency to last for many weeks, months, or even years. So, starting off with sort of the why, well, certainly in the Western academic literature, there are plenty of reports of lessons learned and topics that seem to be always the site of tension during a mass casualty response. And I'll put them up on here. Communication, safety and security for responders, the human resources, the mobilizing of the people, having in place the policy, the plans and the procedures for how the hospital would respond, command, control and coordination of the response. Of course, care delivery is the most important outcome, but it's underpinned by the bullets that I've put before that. And then finally, a topic that's not often discussed, but actually really important when one thinks about systems, is the money. And of course, in the first instance, money is often not an object, and all the resources that are available are applied to the crisis. But as we saw, particularly during COVID, money was probably the biggest and most important economic challenge for our countries, which included the money available for the delivery of health services. So with those as lessons, let us now consider an approach. So this graphic that we designed specifically for the course summarizes the World Health Organization emergency care system framework and can be divided into pre-hospital and hospital. And in many countries, there's a sustained effort to improve ambulance services, the coordination of dispatch of ambulances, and the training for paramedics and other people who work in the pre-hospital arena. But all of that is then about delivering the live patient to the hospital. So we then have to deconstruct. So what is it that goes on inside a hospital? We are familiar with the initial phase of reception, which is triage, registration of the patient, and putting them into the order to be treated. And then the emergency treatment of the patient, and then the disposal. And in the top right-hand element of this picture, we can see disposition as transfer, discharge, and admission. And often that is as far as hospitals think. But what I'm going to show is that hospitals need to think well beyond just the function of the emergency department. And so we can consider then how a mass casualty incident evolves over time. And the aspect that I talked about policy, planning and procedures is represented in the bottom bar, the standby phase, where actually hospitals should always be capable of responding because you've done the work to enable the hospital to stand by. And then if a major incident is warned and standby is formally announced, then all you're doing is dusting off the procedures and arrangements ready in case you actually need to respond. And if you look at the sort of the volume of effort shown by the arrow on the left-hand side, there's an initial surge of effort, a consolidation phase, and then after the red line, if the incident's a single incident, a recovery phase, which includes not only resetting the hospital, but also capturing all of the information, being prepared for inquiries, the inquest necessary to establish cause of death in individual patients, etc. And again, in sort of behavioral terms, we may well train for the initial response and consolidation, but perhaps not consider all of the activities that need to be put in place to ensure that recovery and lessons learned goes as well as possible. So this is one graphic from the course that sort of sets out the phases of a mass casualty incident. Let me now just sort of place the hospital in a system. And one of the things we've done with the course is develop a graphic that shows a hospital in a large urban environment. We consider that there may well be other hospitals. We consider the routes to and from the hospital through which the ambulances might travel. We consider locations that might be predictable in terms of sources of incidents, for instance, a port causing an industrial accident, a fire in a high-rise block, a flooding to a low-lying residential area, etc. So one aspect of the course is thinking about hazard vulnerability assessment and thinking about what it could be that causes patients to arrive at a hospital in a major incident. And then by considering the locations within the incident, we can then think about the preparations necessary. For instance, if there's a major industrial event, might the hospital need to have pre-existing stocks of treatment for particular chemical incidents, or might the hospital itself be involved in the cause of the disaster? So might the hospital be affected by a flood or an earthquake? And then as we focus down on the hospital itself, we can consider how a hospital is organized with the standing arrangements for departments, and then how those departments might have to change in the event of a major incident. And particularly in this graphic, we've shown the emergency department focusing on the P1 and P2 patients, and perhaps taking over an outpatients area as the P3 overflow. And you can think in more detail at the internal layout of an emergency department, how it operates routinely, and then how it would be reorganized in the event of a major incident. Now, we put the whole thing together under a framework we've called the Hospital Disaster Management Framework, and taken the patient flow that I showed you with the emergency care flow and taken the patient through the hospital. So across the middle, you can see reception and triage, emergency treatment, inpatient treatment, rehabilitation and recovery. Across the top, we have the hospital management function. And along the bottom, we have the clinical support services and the hospital support services. And the course is designed with each of these as individual modules. And we consider how within each of the modules, both the organizational function and the clinical function ensures the care of the patient as they flow through the system. And the course is designed to communicate the interfaces across all of these areas within a hospital. So it refreshes the individual clinical skills, but it's not a clinical course. It's an organizational course, and it's designed for clinicians to understand how hospitals work as an organization. And so the individual components are shown here, and I particularly emphasize the hospital management function: command and control, coordination, communication information, policies, processes, procedures, the people, and education, because that's the bit that often is less well trained when one thinks about disaster response at the system level. And so, again, the course is designed to be thinking about hospitals as a system and the role of hospital management and leadership within the hospital as a system. And then finally, just the last couple of slides, I've talked about the surge of response, but we also talk in the course about the duration of an incident and how the hospital management team have to anticipate the future and mobilize resources to keep the emergency function flowing and ensure that the hospital is able to have the capacity to care for the patient. So the Beyond Shift 1 example takes a transport accident and considers, after the emergency care, what about the patients who require surgery, the patients who have filled up ICU? What's the impact on the rest of the hospital, and how does the hospital have to anticipate for the next 2 to 3 days before you can begin to think about restoring services? The next time frame that we introduce is a disruption to routine care time frame. We've taken earthquake as an example. So what happens if the hospital itself has become so badly damaged that actually you can't return back to normal, but you've got to return back to normal clinical services? How do you then begin to think about expanding capacity, being able to receive external humanitarian assistance, re-establishing the most essential services, of which perhaps maternity care is the one that is the most hit if a hospital can't provide emergency care, re-establishing preventive medicine services, etc. And then the final group is the no return phase, where of conflict is perhaps the best case example, where a hospital close to the front line is not going to return back to the delivery of routine patient services for the population it normally looks after, because it's going to turn into a trauma hospital. So how do you then redistribute the services that have to be restored to other parts of the whole healthcare system? How might you accept reinforcements, perhaps even from the military, to be able to care for the battlefield injured? So in conclusion, what I've tried to do is just introduce some of the concepts that we have included in this course to emphasize the critical role of hospitals within emergency and disaster response, and to emphasize the hospital as a system within a system of systems, and therefore create a course that provides the background information for clinicians and hospital managers to be able to think about how do they prepare their hospital for mass casualty incidents or major disasters. So if I come out of the slide pack, and then perhaps we can use this as a framework for our discussions. Saurabh.
Professor Martin, thank you very much. I saw the initial drafts of the course, but I think it's absolutely incredible what you and your team have developed in terms of a really important systems approach to planning. And I think it's fantastic that we've got participants from far afield as Oman and Malaysia and Guyana, the USA, in Illinois, and it's wonderful to have such a wide participation. But I think what this course really does is bring together an important nidus of that disaster and resilience response. So the World Health Organization have a document called Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response, and that's a wide system approach to disasters. The UN has a disaster risk reduction approach, and between the WHO and the UN, they talk about how to manage disasters from the response to the preparedness, from the preparedness to the response. But I think what your course really brings is something that's lacking in the international literature, that there isn't anywhere where it's described how the hospital needs to transform itself from business as usual to crisis intervention. And that transformation really needs a mindset change. And a couple of questions from your presentations. You mentioned the importance of moving from a clinical capacity into a leadership or managerial capacity. Now, those leadership transitions are really problematic for clinicians to make. That's an open statement. We can debate that. But certainly my observation is that those individuals that are absolutely fantastic at doing rapid sequence inductions or surgical cricothyroidectomies or chest drains or whatever that might be, there isn't the time in their day to learn how to do that managerial and leadership transition thing. But when crisis happens, that's not the time to do it. So can you just explain how you can make not only the people change, but the system to change from business as usual to crisis?
Sure. And indeed, you could argue this is one area where the armed forces and military medical services train, because, of course, they're not ever going to have the crisis of war apart from when war actually happens. And so the only way you can prepare for it is to train. And that means you've actually got to dedicate the time. And by dedicating the time, I think you've got to frame it in the case of time for individuals, time for teams, and time for organizations. And in the course, we talk about training as part of preparedness. And we talk about the individual courses that individual people need to do. And obviously in the clinical arena, that's pretty sophisticated, from advanced trauma life support, surgical courses, etc. What has then evolved is a recognition that clinicians work in teams, and teams, to be effective, have to actually learn how to work together. And so there has been the development of courses now that are focused on the team dynamics and how people with skills come together. What I hope we've tried to do with this course is then emphasize the importance of organizations and the teams of teams element. And talking about the individual, we then have to think about how do you do the training. So we talk about tabletop exercises as a tool to rehearse the people in the system. And then finally, we talk about the value of investment in doing live exes, where you actually have the chance to move simulated casualties through your hospital as a system. We also recognize that that's not only the most expensive in terms of money, but absolutely the most expensive in terms of time. And it's time as opportunity cost for other things. And so you have to have a sort of gradated hierarchy that leads to your aspirational live X, but you've got to go through the phases to make sure that you get the maximum out of the live X. And that's where I hope this course helps, because it puts this all into a package.
Yeah, no, it's and of course, train as you mean to fight is a motto that we use quite regularly in the military, but also train together, and that's vitally important. So one of the aspirations about a systems of systems is the idea of a One Health approach, which is where you combine human, environment, animal, and so on within your society. There's also a whole of government approach, a pan-government approach to make systems work and function. And it's wonderful to see our colleagues from Guyana and Jordan and Beirut and various nations. When I worked for NATO, it was fascinating to watch how some NATOs have a really advanced whole of government approach, and some nations are not quite so advanced. And there's a real difficulty in those nations that really haven't got that whole of government One Health approach to implement a system of systems that your course leads them to believe. How can you help practitioners on the ground where they are trying to implement a system of systems and make the hospital part of that whole of government approach? What are the things they can do?
So very much picking up on your opening remarks about the value of the considerable amount of work that's happened in the sort of international and multilateral domain. As a foundation, we made the decision that where either the UN, WHO, or European Union or other reference organizations had already put in place some structural guidance, we would refer to that. So the first phase of this course is a light reminder of all of these external resources, and to reinforce the point that a hospital is within a system, and actually to enable the people think about the role of hospitals to think about looking upwards, and to whom does a hospital communicate? That is local government, that is the pre-hospital care services, that is the community responders, that is the charities and the NGO organizations that are often the most powerful form of societal mobilization in a crisis. So definitely an emphasis to understand the wider context before we then focus on what goes on inside the buildings of a hospital. And then finally, putting to your point, One Health in terms of types of crises. Certainly in Europe, there's a concern about the risk of trauma being the next crisis in the event of a war in Europe. But we've definitely seen COVID as an infectious disease health emergency. In the UK right now, we're experiencing an unprecedented heat wave, a climate emergency, and there could well be risks in other parts of the world in regard to food and nutrition, etc. So absolutely, it's part of placing the clinical services of a hospital in its preparation for any type of health-related threat, be it trauma, be it infectious disease, be it an industrial accident, or anything else that can be a threat to human health. One Health, of course, also covers animal health and plant health, and there is an element here where the medical services or the health services need to be closely aligned with the veterinary services and the food and agricultural services. Again, all part of understanding context.
Right. And that One Health approach is really vitally important, and actually trying to incorporate it into, for example, you may have a zoonotic outbreak, and therefore understanding your vector is so very important. I'd just like to turn to the audience and just ask if there are any questions for Professor Martin to just jot them down in the chat, and I'll be very happy to ask those questions as we go through. But I was interested to know your perspective on modern technology. You talked about communication being absolutely vital, not only horizontally but vertically, as you described both structures. What are the modern technologies that are in front of us today that may help with any of these parts, but specifically communication?
So one of the things that we look at in the course is information, and we consider all of the different types of information that a hospital has to process. We're very familiar with the healthcare record as a source of information and the evolution of electronic healthcare records. But we need to think about how the healthcare record is integrated, like how alongside the clinical record, how do you put the laboratory records, the imaging records, the transfusion records all into one place? And then what are the vulnerabilities? What happens if these break down because your hospital's been subject to a cyber attack, or you've had a dramatic power outage because of the disaster that's happened? So not only do we look at the threats to health of the population that's going to need to access the hospital, we look at the threats to a hospital as a system, and what are the fallback positions and the, the sort of reversionary arrangements that enable a hospital to be able to continue to provide services if the normal arrangements have broken down. But I think your point about information is so important, because the lesson learned process is absolutely dependent on information. And perhaps the one evolution or transformation that's happened in trauma care over the last 20 years is the development of trauma registries, the creation of aggregated large databases that allow us to monitor the performance at system level of the care of patients, and then to look at what innovations can be adopted at system level to continue to improve survivability and also long-term outcomes.
Yeah, I know that's absolutely vital, and you've answered that so eloquently without using the term artificial intelligence, of course, because that's one of the new kids on the block. I'm not certain whether there is a role particularly for that technology within the hospital system of systems approach, apart from, as you mentioned, the very, very huge importance of trauma registries. So we've got a question in the chat about the link with climate change consequences. So many of the disasters that we see today are climate related. So 70% of natural hazards are of a waterborne nature, be that flood or tidal wave or whatever that might be. So 70% of them are associated with water. And how does the hospital help prevent that hazard from becoming a human disaster? Because as a hazard happens, you can't prevent the hazard happening. You can't prevent the flood or the catastrophe, whatever that might be. But what you can do is prevent that from flowing into the human population and creating a human disaster. What role do hospitals play in that transition?
So this is a reinforcement on the point of resilience of hospitals. So as part of that hazard vulnerability assessment, one has to think about what are the vulnerabilities of the hospital to the hazards that might affect the populations. And if it's naturally occurring disasters such as flooding or earthquake or hurricanes, any of the standard list, then it's important to design de novo the solutions to those when you are building hospitals in the first place. And if you're then trying to retrofit, you then have to think about, okay, so how might you adapt your existing hospital structure to be able to cope with those hazards as well. So, and again, this is where the course is a signpost. It's not a definitive reference point, because there are well-established building standards for hospitals, in terms of protecting power supply, data networks, water, sewage, sanitation, etc. So you're absolutely right that one has to think about protecting the resilience of hospitals and then designing that in, if at all possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating topic. What's amazing about the disaster space are the parallel universes that need to come together to make it work. It's not just healthcare practitioners and healthcare managers and hospitals that make this work. So, for example, 2 miles from where, Professor, you are sitting now, last week was an international conference on the design and build of hospital structures at the Queen Elizabeth Centre in Westminster. It was a 3-day conference, all the big manufacturers and suppliers and builders of hospitals looking at resilience for healthcare facilities in the construction industry. 1,500 people talking about how you can build hospitals and healthcare systems that are much more resilient to the natural hazards that we currently face. So absolutely fascinating combination of so many different industries that need to come together, and it's not just us in healthcare that need to make this work. So, Professor, thank you very much. I think that kind of concludes our discussion. It's been a fantastic eye-opener to your course. I think there's a significant amount of knowledge, skill, and information contained within it. And I certainly encourage those members of the panel to engage with that course. And I think, Sarah, I think if you're back online, it may be a time to ask a couple of questions of how do you access this course? What are the mechanisms for accessing AidUP, and how can Lecturio help these fantastic people from all over the world that we're speaking to access and develop that resilience? I think you've got a little bit of an overview of Lecturio and the process for applying and accessing not only this course, but I think as we mentioned earlier, there's a range of courses that we've shown here earlier across the disaster space, and this is not by any means a complete list. Professor Martin's course is not on there because it's so new; it's just been launched, so it's not been updated. So there are a number of courses, but over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you both. It was such a fascinating discussion. And I do have a few questions that I would like to ask, but only if we have time. If not, I can send them later, especially in light of my research and what I do on this. But before we share some resources with the audience and before we talk about how they can access some of these resources and share QR codes and everything else and more information, I would like to invite one of my colleagues, Jaime Horacio, who will kind of give you an overview of what this looks like within Lecturio, what AidUP looks like, and everything, and then we can continue with this discussion. But thank you both of the speakers. I hope you will stick around with us and take a look at some of the resources and everything. However, I know that you're busy and you can choose to stay by the end. So thank you so much. Jaime, I am kind of giving the mic to you now to kind of show us what AidUP looks like within Lecturio. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Goran. So hello, everyone. I'll be giving a short overview of the AidUP platform. Yeah, so it's hosted on this URL, aidup.lecturio.com. You can access it from anywhere. All you need is a web browser and good internet connection. And on here, we have the disaster medicine courses. So let me just show you what we have right now. So there are actually several courses that are available here. Introduction to um, casualty assessment. We have something on mental health as well, psychological first response in disaster settings. And yeah, the hospital management courses are actually now on Lecturio. And I think there'll be more there's more to be added in the coming weeks. But yeah, so for example, let me just focus on Introduction to Hospital Disaster Management. We have several videos under this course, and let me just show you one of these videos. And yeah, Lecturio, so we design everything based on the latest learning science principles. So as you'll see when you're watching the video, there are several activities like this short quiz before and after the test to make sure that the learners are actually picking something up from the video. And if you are handling an institution or if you want to monitor the progress of your learners, it's possible to see their scores and progress for each of the videos and courses that they will watch on Lecturio. So let me just play this. And there are subtitles available right now, just English and Ukrainian, but we're adding to this. And also there's a transcript. The objectives are clearly outlined, and the PDF slides that are shown on screen or on the video can be downloaded. So not for this one, but for the other courses that we have, you can definitely download the slides that are being presented by the educator. Okay. And yeah, so if you're an educator, you can assign this to your learners. You can have a group on AidUP.Lecturio, and you can pick out the videos and courses that you want them to learn. And then they can do this on their own, and you can monitor their progress. Yeah, in addition to the disaster medicine courses, we also have Lecturio courses. So medical courses that we developed to supplement disaster medicine courses such as first aid, basic life support. So yeah, we have everything covered. At the same time, we also have the possibility of having certifications on Lecturio. So we have these learning paths available, which are complete study plans. And so we've already organized all the relevant material related to disaster mental health. And this can be, yeah, all the learners have to do is go through this. There are exams built in throughout the learning path, and at the end, they will get a certificate that they completed this course on AidUP Lecturio. Yes. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to focus on. Basically, we do have several videos already in disaster medicine live on AidUP.Lecturio. And as I showed within the video, there are questions to make sure that our learners are picking up something or they're remembering what they're learning from the videos, and that there's an additional review after they watch a video. And of course, we make all the information available, such as learning objectives, as well as the slides, which can be downloaded if they are available for a particular video. Right. So there's much more actually, but I think that'll be more relevant in the deep dives because I know all of you have your own use cases. The context very specific. So I would recommend that if you think this is interesting, that if you think you can use this, please reach out. And yeah, one of our team members will get in touch with you to see, how you can get access to AidUP and what courses we can make available. Right. Yeah, Goran, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you very much for showing us what the platform looks like, Jaime. So as you can see in the chat, there is a link to AidUP where you can get additional information on how you as individuals or potentially your institutions can get to AidUP and to get it for yourselves or for your institution. And as mentioned, even though it could be purchased individually and institutionally, this can also become part and be integrated within existing academies and can power national interventions that are already in existence. So I hope that you have seen the Lecturio platform in of itself. So AidUP contains additional information to that platform. But if you're interested in any of these and you want to see more of what that looks like, please do feel free to get in touch with us. Yes, I see that there is a question whether this can be purchased individually. Yes, it can. So for anyone who wants to know more, please feel free to scan the QR code or click on the link that was given in the chat to connect with our team and to get additional information about how you can purchase this individually or institutionally, and to get in touch with us if you want to get a demo where you get to kind of get a more specific walkthrough throughout. So this webinar is hosted by Lecturio, as you know, and apart from AidUP and from everything that you heard about us today, there is a few other options that you can take. Now, Lecturio also has gotten SimTix. So we have SimTix and SimTutor by Lecturio. So if you want to work on any form of simulation, that simulation can be available to you on any device. There's over 200 interactive simulation of real clinical procedures, and you could add any of yours, including ones that are emergencies. There's a step-by-step guidance, and it's self-paced, accessible anytime with no special equipment needed. And you can also simulate any form of real-time conversations with any providers or any patients or any patient families or anything that you would need. If you're interested more in simulation medicine or SimTix or SimTutor, please feel free to scan the QR code or, again, get in touch with us at any point in time. Apart from that, Lecturio also offers Healer. So if you want to see clinical reasoning, and if you want to have a complete walkthrough of patients where you could assess and also train the clinical reasoning skills that your learners might have, and that includes medical students, nursing students, but also postgraduate trainees, feel free to scan the QR code and learn more about Healer. If you have any additional Lecturio questions, please contact us and contact our Learning Science team at learningscience@lecturio.com. You could also contact our Director of Global Projects for Disaster Health and Conflict Medicine, Uwe Schneider, who works on AidUP and who helped us prepare this webinar and find our wonderful speakers that he is collaborating with today. So a little before the hour is over, I would like us to kind of sign off from today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, morning, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. For any questions that you have regarding to anything you've heard today, please do let us know, and feel free to contact us on any platform, on any of these emails, and we will then make sure we'll relay this to our speakers. To our speakers, Dr. Sohrab Dalal and Professor Dr. Martin Bricknell, I want to thank you very much for being here. I learned a lot. I worked with health systems as well and with professional identity formation, so this has been very eye-opening and very privy and important to my work as well. So it was a pleasure and an honor to have you here today. With that, I sign off from this webinar and hope to see you again in the future. Happy learning.